I recognize myself for questions. I have said since we started this that the goal of this committee would be to come away with some capabilities or at least standard operating procedures in an effort to be able to predict the next pandemic, prepare for the next pandemic, protect ourselves from the next pandemic, and hopefully prevent the next pandemic. But first I want to ask each of the witnesses, yes or no, does the origin of COVID-19 matter to protect the globe from future pandemics? We'll go down the line, Dr. Metzl.
100% absolutely and completely yes.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Dr. Auwaerter?
Yes.
Dr. Redfield?
Yes.
Okay. So we're all on the same page there. Dr. Metzl, I have a question for you. You know, we've heard the testimony and we know scientifically fact that we have found in the past with these types of viruses, coronaviruses in particular, SARS, MERS, we found an intermediary. My question is, do you feel that we as a scientific community around the world have robust capabilities to do that type of investigation to find an intermediary? We have the assets we need for that.
Technically, we do, and we know that the Chinese government has actually been very aggressive in trying to find that kind of intermediary host animal. They've sequenced about 100,000 animals. They haven't found anything. In SARS and MERS, as you mentioned, those intermediary hosts were found relatively quickly. And so given that the Chinese government has every incentive to find an intermediate host, I think it's very significant that that hasn't been found, but we have that capability, and everybody has a reason to want to find it, particularly the Chinese government, and I think it's very telling that after 3 years we still haven't found it.
Dr. Auwaerter, I ask you the same question about those capabilities. Microphone.
Yep. I would agree that we have the technical capabilities. What I would say, though, is with coronaviruses, they are highly mutable, which we've seen over these past 3 years as the virus has evolved. And regarding finding intermediaries, there are examples, for example, with the Ebola virus, where we have not yet found a clear intermediary, despite looking very hard. And no one thinks that came about from a lab accident, decades ago. So I think it's still an open question. I think everything does need to be explored. There's always opposing points of view here that need to be weighed, and not all hypotheses are weighed equally.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you talked about them being highly mutable. I assume they can be mutable in a lab. Dr. Redfield, are you an advocate for a moratorium on gain-of-function research, particularly research on potential pandemic pathogens, and why?
Yes, I am. I think that, again, I think the people that are advocates for gain-of-function research do believe that by doing this research, they somehow get ahead of the curve. I'm of the point of view that we don't need to make pathogens more transmissible or more pathogenic in order to get ahead of the curve. We can begin to deal with those pathogens as they evolve. I don't think this should be a decision made by scientists alone. This is a societal decision. There should be a broad debate about whether this research is really necessary. And if so, we should decide how to do it safely and responsibly. I remind people, when I was CDC director, one of the most difficult things I had to do as a 20-something-year Army vet was shut down Fort Detrick. It wasn't very popular. These people were my friends. I knew them. But our inspection showed that they were cutting corners in their biosecurity requirements. And I felt that we weren't going to take that chance with the Frederick community and beyond. And so I shut the lab down for 4 to 6 months until they corrected their biosecurity. So I think this is much more complicated than people think. And if we are to go down that path, I would argue there's a few labs in the world that should be with multiple redundancy in containment to do this. But I'm not convinced it's to an advantage, and this is why in the Wall Street Journal op-ed I strongly recommend that we have a moratorium on gain-of-function research, similar to what we had in the Obama administration.
In one sentence, can you provide a definition of gain-of-function research? And I say that because there becomes a little semantics sometimes, I believe, within the scientific community of what is a chimera and what is gain-of-function.
Yeah, I think it's to take a pathogen and try to increase one of two things or both, to increase its transmissibility or its pathogenicity. I disagree with some of my colleagues at NIH to say the definition is restricted to a pathogen that's already a pathogen. If I make a non-pathogen pathogenic, that's gain-of-function.
So in your expert opinion, was the Wuhan Institute conducting gain-of-function research on
Absolutely.
coronaviruses? Thank you. So one other path of questioning for you, Dr. Redfield. Proponents of this research claim it may result in vaccines or maybe even stop a pandemic. Dr. Redfield, has gain-of-function created any life-saving vaccines or therapeutics to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Has gain-of-function stopped a pandemic, in your opinion?
No, on the contrary, I think it probably caused the greatest pandemic our world has seen.
Do you find any tangible benefits to gain-of-function research at this time?
I personally don't, but I do want to stress, I think the men and women that support it are people of good faith because they truly believe it's going to lead to a potential benefit. I disagree with that assessment.